Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Iowa State Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. Appreciate everybody for jumping in. We got an interesting topic today to talk about, talking about Cody Campbell and his big plan to save college athletics. Um, it's kind of one of the big talking points of the last couple weeks coming out of media days and a few different interviews he's done. Kind of just about the future, not like just the playoff, but as far as just helping keep college athletics as a whole alive and thriving, or at least maybe not thriving as so much at this point in time, but keeping it alive and so that it can be stabilized going forward. A couple other things been popping up. Iowa State did get a commitment last week in the form of a tight end, and this is kind of we're in the dead period. From what I understand is that the commitment of the tight end, who I'm going to pull up his 247 page here just in a second. And he, from what I understand, is that Iowa State's plan has always been to take two tight ends in this cycle. So Drake DeBon is the recruit here. Let me pull him up here. There we go. Drake DeBon is the tight end recruit that picked him up. Oh, mid upper 3-star. He's got an offer there from Wake Forest, Army. Not like a massive offer list or anything like that, but he's got good size, 6'6", 240 out of Shawnee Mission. I don't know a ton about him. I haven't watched a ton of his film yet. I guess if you see that catch right there, good vertical player. Moves off the line. All right. Good. Nice block. It's a really nice block, actually. But from what I understand is that this commitment does not affect the potential commitment of Evan Jacobson, from what I understand. So as far as I know, Evan Jacobson, the 4-star product out of Waukee, is still in play. Obviously, we have not heard anything. Haven't heard anything from him in the last few weeks as we're in the dead period right now. No crystal balls yet in for him or anything. I haven't heard anything new. So as far as I know, as far as anybody knows, Iowa State is still a presumptive, one of the presumptive favorites, along with, Texas A&M for sure. I'm not 100% sure about Notre Dame now that they've already taken two tight ends this class. Would they turn down a third tight end if he's a 4-star player? I don't know. Probably not. Maybe Notre Dame kind of has that luxury that they can do that. But they've already got 2 tight ends committed to the class. So I don't know if anybody knows for sure exactly how in play Notre Dame is. But Texas A&M for sure is in the race there with Iowa State as well. And from whatever they have heard, is that Stanford is still in there as well, but haven't really gotten anything new out of that. So we might not hear, we could hear from Evan Jacobson any time, but from what I understand is that it was closer to the beginning of the season type of thing as when we might hear more about him going forward. One thing I did see there was earlier in a couple of different places this week. We heard his name get dropped at Big 12 Media Days. Was incoming true freshman running back River Peppers, which anybody that's been a loyal watcher of this show since we started last December would know that I picked out River Peppers in the spring when we did our 2025 recruiting class summary episode. I kind of gushed about River Peppers for quite a while on that show because I think he's a really impressive player, and it was gratifying to hear Matt Campbell kind of drop his name at Big 12 Media Days as a surprise, interesting player to watch. And then I believe he got some airtime earlier this week on the Williams and Bloom show over on Cyclone Fanatic as well. So it's cool to see that pick is starting to take, see some fruit, see some return on that at least a little bit, and that I wasn't the only one that thought he looked a pretty nice player. Like I said, I don't know what his playing time looks like this fall because Iowa State's got a pretty stacked running back room in Carson Hansen and Abu Sama, and then behind them Dylan Lee, and then Aiden Flora maybe figures in somewhere in there because he got some carries last year too. But River Peppers remains a name going forward to keep an eye on. But who knows exactly what his role will look like. Maybe he's a special teams guy. Maybe if they put maybe they put Xavier Townsend on punts or kicks and they put River Peppers on the other one. It's certainly possible. But let's move on to kind of the main topic of today's episode, which is a plan put forth by Cody Campbell, who is on the Texas Board of Regents and is a massive Texas Tech donor. And he is almost single-handedly responsible for, Texas Tech's kind of not even resurgence, but ascendancy to, being one of the biggest spending athletic programs in the country in terms of NIL. They paid millions of dollars for softball players, for track athletes, they put together an extremely expensive football class as well. And for that reason, Texas Tech is expected to be one of the contenders for the Big 12 this year. He has been over to say this spring, I think, and especially at Big 12 Media Days, has been getting a lot of airtime for a plan that he has been putting out and working with apparently the president and a few other people on, as far as trying to figure out what the path forward looks like for college football and for college athletics in general. The 10,000 foot summary of his plan is essentially for the Power 4 schools to pool all of their television revenue, and I actually think it may be it's all Power 4 for sure, and then maybe depending on how it's all formatted, potentially to include the G5 as well. And I think the idea is if he were to get 100% his way, that the group of 5 would be included in this as well, is to essentially everybody pools all of their television revenue into one bucket, and it gets redistributed around the country to help a lot of schools that are really struggling financially. And it's not just the New Mexico states and Nevadas and and UTEPs and whoever else, Utah states that are struggling financially. Ohio State posted a loss in this last fiscal year. The year that Michigan won the national title, so 2 seasons ago, last year, Michigan posted a loss. They posted a loss in a year that they won the football national title. Even big schools are struggling. Now, some have dealt with that in different ways. Some schools took on debt. I believe Louisville and Kentucky both took on debt. Some schools are getting help from their Board of Regents. I believe Tennessee, I know Tennessee for sure is getting funding from their Board of Regents. I think there are other programs. I'm not sure off the top of my head. I know a lot of Iowa and Iowa State fans would very much like for the Iowa Board of Regents to chip in and help dedicate funding to these schools to help solve some of these issues. But, going forward, because there's a lot of schools that are having trouble with these, and unfortunately, the first resort for a lot of these schools when they're having issues, balancing the budget in their athletics program, the first thing they do is start cutting programs. They start cutting swimming and diving teams. They start cutting softball teams. They start cutting track and field teams. They start cutting, rowing teams, whatever it is. And all of those athletes that were getting a college education for free, that had the chance to compete in, one of the highest levels in their sports, in their respective sport, they're losing all of that opportunity. And then college athletics just starts moving in, more and more in the direction of where only football, men's basketball, and maybe women's basketball survive. But the tricky part is the way the model is right now is it's kind of just, you get whatever cut of the pie you can negotiate. And then, with the new revenue distribution, they are, most most athletics programs are giving, the majority to football and, to football and then to men's basketball and then to everybody else. Some schools are giving money to everyone, like Iowa State. It's still weighted based on the program, but everybody's getting something. And other schools are choosing not to. It's a difficult situation. And even just since the July 1st, since July 1st kicked in for revenue sharing, something like 50 programs have been cut across the country. We've already had 50 athletics programs, or 50 sports across the country at different schools cut in the last 2 weeks because of revenue sharing. Or this summer with either anticipated revenue sharing or since revenue sharing has taken over. It's not a sustainable thing. If you want to preserve college athletics as, being what they are, as being college athletics, and not just watch them fall by the wayside and them all drop down to just being intramural sports, basically, the funding structure for these things has to change. Now, this is not to say that it is necessarily a revenue problem or only a revenue problem. There is a revenue problem in that it is very unequal for, it's very, very unequal revenue income for sports programs that their costs don't differ enough to make up for the revenue differences. And that doesn't necessarily mean that every program necessarily deserves to make as much money as the other ones, whatever that means. um, but what it does mean is that smaller programs still incur many of the same costs as the bigger programs, especially in terms of travel and nutrition and things like that. But they get just a fraction of the TV money as these bigger programs. And that makes it really difficult for them to compete and then to even just exist going forward. You know, how long can, the very bottom end of the G5, how long can they continue to do that? The University of Idaho not that long ago was in G5, and then they just said, screw it, we can't hang in this league. So they dropped down to the FCS. And we've seen a few FCS programs jump up recently. James Madison jumped up recently. Last year, Kennesaw State did. Then this year, we've got Missouri State and Delaware. A few programs jumping up into the FBS because they think that they can compete. And they need they're ideally on a longer term basis are hoping to get increased revenue and stuff like that to be able to enrich whatever they're doing. Just not their athletic program, but enrich the entire school. Which is a point that we've talked about previously where, athletic success absolutely can drive a rise in admissions and all this. And that there's a big domino effect from all that. But it's not right now, it's not structured in a way that even the biggest schools are, breaking they're not even breaking even. Now, there are absolutely schools that are still profiting lots and lots and lots of money. But if Ohio State and Michigan can't turn a profit, that doesn't bode well for a lot of other programs. Now, where does this start is a very complicated question that has a simple question that has a very, very complex and complicated answer. But you can at least draw a line of demarcation at COVID and say this is where things got more stressful, markedly more stressful. Even before that, there were programs that were doing better than others and some that weren't making money, whatever it is. But COVID put extra strain on everybody. Most programs ended up having to dip into cash reserves or having to take on debt or start considering private equity, as in the case of like Florida State, I think is what it was, which that fortunately never came to fruition at least has not yet. But that's a time where you can point and say, okay, this is where budgets got more strained, and they really had to start figuring out what to do, what their long-term plan was from the money side. Iowa State, fortunately, I don't believe, to my knowledge, did not take on any extra debt or didn't take on any debt to make it through COVID. They dipped into cash reserves. And then, to my knowledge, Iowa State does not have any athletics, long-term athletics debt. I'm sure they have some small stuff or whatever. But to my knowledge, like Iowa State is not in debt, the athletics program. University of Iowa is in debt. They took on debt to pay people during COVID. Um, obviously, so Iowa State being able to dip into cash reserves is great. Not everybody is able to do that. But, even though Iowa State was able to dip into cash reserves instead of taking out loans, that's still it's still not a long-term solution to try to cover costs with this. Because now, if Iowa State wants to continue to compete at the Power Four level, which they absolutely do, and they will do everything they possibly can to make that happen, they're going to need to be at that $20.5 million mark with the revenue sharing and all that. So now there is a $20.5 million extra budget line item on their budget that they've got to cover that currently there is not enough money to cover. What does that mean for Iowa State going forward? One, the best possible solution to this for Iowa and Iowa State, Iowa State and Iowa, I should say, is for the Iowa Board of Regents to vote to direct funding, to essentially fund the revenue sharing portion of this, to dedicate $41 million to split between Iowa and Iowa State to cover revenue sharing. That's what should happen, because they need to recognize that Iowa and Iowa State football are both major sources of tourism and revenue generation within the state. There will be people that will push back and say, oh my gosh, well, I can't believe we're spending it on sports and all this, whatever. Iowa and Iowa State football are massive revenue generators for the state of Iowa, way beyond just people playing the game of football. It does so much for the local communities, for the counties, for the state. They are a very, very valuable commodity, asset. I shouldn't say commodity, a very valuable asset for the state of Iowa. Both of them are. And the state regions should recognize that. The state of Iowa should recognize that and do their best to make sure that that remains the case. But to zoom out a little bit more, Cody Campbell's plan is to consolidate all of this TV revenue so it can be redistributed, and to all the schools that chip in, obviously, to make college athletics kind of as we have known it to an extent viable in the long term. So that way we don't have to watch, a Utah State make a decision between, okay, are we going to dump all of our women's and athletics, or all of our women's sports and Olympic sports just so we can cover the cost of football and men's basketball? Or are we going to cut football and keep everything else? Like, are they just going to be Gonzaga, where that, they have basketball and all their Olympic sports, but no football? You don't really want to you don't really want them to have to make that decision. That sucks. You're taking away scholarship opportunities from people that in a lot of cases can absolutely use it, and get a college education for free is massive. And in the case of football teams, you're getting a college education for free, and you're probably making pretty good money on the way there. If you're at a Power 4 school, you're probably making pretty good money while you're doing that. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I know that was I went off on a tangent there, but that's kind of what's going on with that. So we talked a little bit about why the athletic programs are struggling. It started with COVID, but why is definitely part of it, is covering the revenue sharing. But another part of this is that, this is not even really just, it's not just limited to athletic departments, but really across the university structure, the university system as a whole, which I'm not going to go into the non-sports side of that in super great detail, just because this is not that kind of podcast. This podcast does not cover that topic. But there is a massive spending problem across collegiate athletics and the university system as a whole. The higher education system in the United States has a massive, massive spending problem. exactly on the education side of it, how that all shakes out, like I said, is kind of outside of the purview of this particular podcast. But inside the athletics, you're talking about, they're spending. There was for a long time there we had that facilities arms race where everybody every year was building the biggest and best locker room in the country, and it's got this, and it's got every locker's got flat screen TVs, and we've got, everyone's got every locker's got a TV and an Xbox, and and we've got all these really, really high end things, and to the point where there's a lot of power four schools where their college football team has better facilities than, or has a better locker room and all that than NFL teams. There's a lot of NFL teams that don't have the type of locker, the in stadium facilities that a lot of college football programs have. Like if you were at, let's say, Texas A&M or something like that, you had their facilities, and then you go to the NFL, there's a decent chance that that you will see a downgrade in the facilities available to you once you get to the NFL, which is kind of a crazy notion. But that's just kind of how it is. The spending got completely out of control. There's no reason that Ohio State should be posting a loss. They make an outrageous amount of money. They get an outrageous amount of donations. They are Ohio State. They are the biggest brand in college athletics, or one of. I would argue they are the biggest brand in college athletics. Aside from like Texas, would probably be the only other. Texas and Michigan would probably be the only other two. But there's no reason that Ohio State and Michigan should be posting losses at all, unless they have a big spending problem. What those spending problems look like are different, obviously, for Ohio State than they are for UTEP or New Mexico State or whatever. But it's a big thing. But unfortunately, costs are only going to continue to go up as economic inflation increases, and in general, everything just gets more expensive. Contracts only get bigger. And as we get farther into revenue sharing and NIL, contracts will only get bigger. We saw Cody Campbell's Texas Tech Red Raiders signed with, this is the first time I think we've ever seen this, though, is this is a 17-year-old, but a future college athlete signing a 3-year contract worth over $10 million. We have high school kids, 17-year-old high school kids signing contracts that are bigger than NFL draft picks, like quite a lot bigger than NFL draft picks. And they're 17 years old and haven't played a snap of college football, much less than, haven't played in the NFL. This is college football. You have 17-year-old kids that will be making more than some NFL draft picks, a bunch of NFL draft picks next year. It's kind of crazy. We saw BYU signed AJ DeBonsa for over, I think it's over $10 million, like an unbelievable amount of money. Things are only going to get more expensive. So here's why I think Cody Campbell's plan makes a lot of sense. And this is part of the same train of thinking as we see in conference realignment, in the playoff structure, and how college football is going to survive going forward, and how it's going to be structured going forward, is that in the end, college football is unique and valuable because of the fabric of the sport that has been developed over 120, 130 years, where you have schools all across the country. You got to remember that this sport started functionally as glorified PE class. College athletics started as PE class, as physical education class, and has evolved into this. And you have regional rivalries. You have schools that have literally been playing each other since before World War I. Iowa State and Kansas State have been playing nonstop since like 1906 or something like that. We didn't have all the states in the country by the when Kansas State and Iowa State were started playing. We were missing a lot of state. We were missing quite a few states, actually. college football is valuable not just because of the Ohio States and the Georgias and the Alabamas and the Texases and the Michigans of the world. It is also valuable because of the Iowa States, the Utah States, the San Diego States, the Delawares, the Coastal Carolinas, the Purdue. Purdue's a bad example. Kind of Purdue's because they're on the same level as Utah State about approximately. Um, you know, those types of schools. College football is unique in that it has a team for everybody, basically. You either went there or your parents went there or your cousins went there or you live near there or whatever. There's lots of reasons that people cheer for college football teams. Um, that are unique from pro sports. And if you take away that uniqueness and you take away that element of college football and you know make it look more and more like a professional league, more and more like the NFL, the less appeal I believe that college football has. I was doing a little bit of digging for this one. And for anybody that is not familiar with the Extra Points newsletter by Matt Brown, Matt is one of the best sports journalists that exists right now, as far as talking about college administration and the real nuts and bolts, the nitty gritty of athletics, not the X's and O's of what happens on the field or roster construction or anything like that, recruiting, none of that. This is talking about the big picture stuff. What moves athletic departments, what moves conferences, things like that. The continental structures, the continental drift of college athletics. He does a better job than anybody covering it. He did make a thing here in his article here talking about some of the big, just kind of all this type of stuff. So in an unreported and little known fact, SEC presidents in March quietly authorized their commissioner Greg Sankey to split from the NCAA if he deems that the right move. So, and actually right here, the Big Ten swung its support for doing just that. So right now you have the SEC and the Big Ten who want to, they want to, if they can make the money work, they would love to split away from the NCAA. Now, college football specifically, moving out from under the NCAA is not inherently a bad idea. It absolutely could be done in a way to make this all better. So that way the NCAA, who can't stop getting things wrong, is no longer in charge of this thing. And you can have people with some common sense running this and restructuring it to make it viable as a long-term product, to make sure that we have as many competitive programs as possible. However, the problem is that the people in charge, and by the people in charge, I mean the people that kind of have a good chunk of the voting power and a good chunk of the, influence, I should say, in college football, is the SEC and then the Big Ten. I know we like to say the SEC, it's the SEC and the Big Ten, and to an extent it is, because the SEC is never going to be able to do anything completely by itself. They would need at minimum the Big Ten to go with, and I believe they would need at least the whole Power Four to go with. But at minimum, nothing can move until the Big Ten is on the SEC's side on whatever issue they're trying to do. But make no mistake about it, the SEC has more influence than the Big Ten. Unfortunately, they have created a little bit of a voting block, because the Big Ten, for the most part, with one exception, which I will talk about here in a second, which was just reported on recently, generally speaking, kind of does whatever the SEC tells them to. Unfortunately, the Big Ten has really not had much of a spine in recent years to stand up to the SEC and say, hey, what you're talking about is dumb. It will hurt the sport. It will eventually kill the sport. They have not done much of anything. Now, to their credit, the one time recently where they have actually shown some modicum of a backbone was about this college football playoff model, the 5-11 model versus the 4-4-2-2 model. Per Greg Sankey, the Big Ten is not on board with the 4-4-2-2 model, which is good because that gives it less traction. And frankly, well, and we already know that the Big 12, the ACC, and the entire G5, nobody is on board with the 4-4-2-2 model except for the SEC. And apparently, I guess the Big Ten is at least hesitant on it enough to say maybe not right now. But the SEC, the Big Ten at least showing some willingness to resist the SEC is a good sign. However, ultimately, the playoff format, I don't know that will, like, on a long-term basis, I don't know that affects, like, I don't know that affects the viability of college football or college athletics in the long term. It does change the format. It changes, which schools, have an easier path to do things. But ultimately, the playoff kind of is what it is. It's mostly just it's a TV event that makes a bunch of money, and it'd be nice to have an equal representation, even though that will never happen. But if we're really talking about the existence of college football and college athletics going forward, this is a big part of this. So obviously the SEC has pissed off basically everybody with everything that the SEC wants to do as far as what would be self-serving to them, pisses off basically everybody because all of them are essentially vindictive to everybody that isn't the SEC or the Big Ten, are constructed in a very specific way to position the SEC and the Big Ten, and especially really just the SEC, as on paper, officially by the letter of the law, as better and more important than everybody else. That is the SEC stance on this. They believe that their product on the field is the only product that matters. Not just that it matters more. The SEC says it matters more. What they actually believe is the SEC is the only thing that matters. They believe if the Big Ten collapsed tomorrow and all of their programs shut down, the SEC believes that they would be fine. They would figure it out. And they believe that if that the SEC shut their doors, the Big Ten would not be fine. The SEC has a complex, specifically Greg Sankey has a complex that believes that it is better and more important, and frankly, the only important thing in college football. And it's pretty disgusting. Fortunately, what is stopping them is the threat of antitrust legislation, which is a pretty big deal. Now, Cody Campbell's plan is to get an exemption, an antitrust exemption. Currently, there are only 2 antitrust exemptions that exist in the United States right now. One is for the railroads. One is a partial exemption for Major League Baseball. This would be the third one. And what that exemption would do would allow them to basically let everybody in college football pool it together and redistribute it there, and not require and essentially let it be one power structure in there, which is obviously what antitrust legislation and it seeks to avoid is one source of power or one controlling power in any specific system. But if the SEC goes to a 4-4-2-2 model, that absolutely could provoke Congress to take action and to enact antitrust legislation and put a stop to this and put a kibosh on the SEC's entire plan, the whole thing. So that is why they can't really move forward with this right now, because they don't want to provoke Congress, which is such a fascinating thing. Um, yeah, right here. So here's a good quote. So Ross Dellinger said, the flip side with the 4-4-2-2-1 format, there's a risk of alienating a large swath of college football fan bases. Absolutely true. If you make it so that way, it's a more difficult road for everybody that is in the Big Ten or the SEC. Those fans will become less engaged and your TV dollars will be worth less. Just straight up. That's how it works. If you attempt to turn college football into a tiered system in which the SEC and the Big Ten are the top tier and everybody else is fighting for scraps and have an unequal chance at fighting for the, quote unquote, the same trophy, they will disengage, and that will negatively impact college football for the long term and for forever. It will degrade on the long-term popularity of college football. And it will could trigger unwanted intervention from congressional lawmakers and adversely impact relations with the two other conferences. The two other conferences being the Big 12 and the ACC. So right now, fortunately, the thing standing in the SEC's way of them completely destroying college football in the name of some weird ego trip on the part of Greg Sankey and the presidents in the SEC is antitrust legislation and a need for the Big 12 and the ACC to be involved in the future of the sport, because though the SEC wants to, even though the SEC believes that it is the only thing that matters in college football, and that if really it came down to the nitty gritty, that the SEC could survive on its own, but the numbers don't support that. The numbers support that even the Big Ten, the SEC could not just break away on their own and just do their own thing. They would lose advertising dollars. They would lose a lot of this in the long term. They would lose, why would Big 12 fans, why would ACC fans watch this new league? Like, why would a Florida State fan, if let's say, broke away and Florida State didn't get an invite to the SEC. Let's say Florida State was left behind in the ACC in what we see as college football, and then their new SEC Big Ten league. Let's say Florida State gets left behind. Why would Florida State fans watch Florida, Georgia? Why would they watch that? It's not even in the same league. You might as well be asking them to watch the English Premier League. I mean, it would be a different sport, play with different players, playing for a different trophy. Why would they even watch? Why would you expect an Iowa State fan to watch Ohio State and Michigan? It's a different sport, different league. You're not going to be able to watch those. You're not going to be able to get fans to watch those games that you were getting before, because you're not playing for the same trophy. You're not playing in the same league. You're not doing anything. And it just blows my mind that they can't seem to understand that what they want to do, while does on paper position the SEC as the clear dominant conference in college football, you could be killing college football in that process. And at that point, what are you ruling over? What are you presiding over? Like, you're presiding over a pile of ashes. Congratulations, you're the biggest. You're the last one standing on a pile of ashes. What did you gain out of that? And it's just the SEC's entire view on college football just frustrates me to no end. But fortunately, there do appear to be at least a few forces getting ready to step up and step in the way of the SEC. But we'll see. Dial Chef says, I'm surprised living in the South how many people only care about SEC football. That's what I'm saying though, is that there is a pervasive belief, not just with the conference commission, not just Greg Sankey, not just with the university presidents, but the entire conference, the entire Southeastern Conference, including the fan bases and everybody involved, believes that the SEC is the only sports league worth caring about at any level. To them, the Big Ten barely matters to an SEC fan. The Big Ten only matters to an SEC fan in that they might have to play one of their teams in the playoff. That is the only thing they care about. They don't care about the Big 12. They don't care about the ACC. They really don't care about the G5. The SES basically doesn't exist to them outside of when they want to play them in week 12 to get to goose their schedules a little bit because they need a free win to get into the playoff to make sure that all the records look better. That's when they care about the FCS. But unfortunately, their plan would kill off the FCS. So instead of teeing off on the Citadel the second week of November, now they'd actually have to play like a G5 school and have to play a Big Ten school, which, I'm sure the SEC would find a way to bitch about that since they already said, well, our schedules are so hard that we should only have to play 8 conference games. Well, that chicken might come home to roost at some point. But it's a very complicated situation. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people in charge of these decisions that are not connected to really what is the source of college football's power, which is the proletariat fan base. College football, more than any other sport, is driven by, fans / alumni. It is, the NFL is driven by viewership and fans to a certain point, because that's who, drives the TV revenue and all that. But like college football just isn't what it is without the fan bases and without, the alumni that become fans and things like that. It just isn't the same thing at all. That is the source of college football's power, is the fan bases and all of that. And you stand to alienate a tremendous amount of people by intentionally trying to carve out the Big 12 and the ACC and the G5 and everybody else from your future vision of college football, because you have this weird superiority complex that everybody has, filled your brain with, mistakenly believing that you are the only thing that matters. Greg Sankey, what he needs more than anything right now is he needs what Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius had, which is someone to listen to, whisper in his ear and say, "You are just a man. You are just a man." Unfortunately, Marcus Aurelius had that because everybody loved him and everybody, they really liked him as an emperor. Nobody likes Greg Sankey, but he is. Hear me a second for any of you non-nerds, but for any of you nerds that do play D&D, play Dungeons and Dragons, Greg Sankey is a character with a very low charisma score that grew up in a background who believed he was, super charismatic and funny and all this, but he's having to find out that he's not funny and that nobody likes him. He's that person. And yet he has a massive amount of power, because the SEC has a massive amount of power because they are worth a lot of money. And they are the first person at the table when ESPN and Fox Sports and whoever else wants to, write a check for a media deal. Yes, the SEC is the first conference they call. If college football were to break away from the NCAA, let's say in 2035, when all the current TV deals run out, I mean, the SEC is going to be driving that bus, potentially along with the Big Ten. Hopefully, neither of them are going to be driving the bus. Hopefully, there's a commissioner. Hopefully, there's somebody in charge of all this. Preferably, I would like Cody Campbell's plan to be there. Say, like, this new league, if college football splits away from the NCAA and you take the FBS as it currently exists and push it off to the side and say, this is our new sport. And we say, we're going to have conferences for the sake of just kind of breaking up teams. Which I do want to talk about of an interesting kind of potential side effect of this, that you do that, and then this whole thing gets renegotiated as saying these are the media rights to college football, not just to the SEC or to the Big Ten or whatever it is. However, one of the fun side effects is the idea that if you were to aggregate um, all the TV revenue into one big pool to distribute amongst all the schools, which obviously the SEC and the Big Ten do not like because they like making more money than everybody else. Fair enough, I guess. We all like making money, but we also all like having, scholarship athletes and things like that and things that aren't just football. But let's say you can get this all to go through. All the schools now are getting an equal revenue distribution of all the TV revenue. I think there's some potential really fun conference realignment that could happen because of this. And this idea, I do want to give credit from he's been a long time follower, of Wider at Natty Light. Just goes by Brian Trax in our Trax was his username. Brian is the name in the Discord, in the Wider Right Natty Light Discord that proposed this idea to me is that if you could get all this to happen and you weren't financially motivated to be in a specific conference in this new league where things are getting restructured, could you realign college football in a way to create better regional rivalries? And I think, and I love that idea because in this, like I said, in this league, you're getting, everybody is going to get the same amount of money. Everybody's going to get an equal shot at the playoff. You maybe say all the conference champions, including the G5, all the conference champions, and then, whatever goes from there. Everything's equal until you hit the football field. Do you realign the Big 12 to look kind of more like it used to, where it's basically just Iowa and Nebraska straight down to Texas, and that's just what that conference is? Maybe you throw in Colorado or the Arizona schools or something like that, but for the most part, keep it there. And then you rebuild the Pac-12. California, Oregon, Washington, the states, those three, Utah, Nevada, grab those. Then you have the SEC, which is basically just Louisiana and then following the Ohio River up to Kentucky and then, across Virginia, basically. So it's that section of the country is the SEC. And they have ACCs along the coast. All these regionally aligned conferences with historical rivalries, in-state rivalries being protected. I love that idea. I think you could do it. Yeah, Brian, there's Brian here right in the comments. I would absolutely love a conference that puts most, if not all, members within a 6 to 7 hour drive for away games. So here's my dream conference. If we were going to completely realign this, here's my dream conference for Iowa State specifically. I want Iowa State, I want Nebraska, I want Minnesota, I want Wisconsin, I want Iowa, I want Kansas and Kansas State, I want Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. I want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teams there. Let's get to a 12-team conference just for fun. So you've got Iowa State, Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nebraska, Kansas, Kansas State, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and then let's give me Missouri. 10. So there's 10. So let's get 2 more. Let's grab Illinois and Northwestern. That'd be fun. Look at that. Nice little right there in the section. You get Upper Midwest, grab Oklahoma. Maybe even say if you want to send the Oklahoma schools down, I would like the Oklahoma schools to be involved. But if you can't, take those 2 out and maybe give me Indiana and Purdue or something like that. Just a real nice Upper Midwest block. That kind of conference would be, you'd have tons of really fun interstate and regional rivalries. So the original 8 plus the Big 10 West, pretty close. The original Big 8 also included Oklahoma State and Oklahoma. But you're in the right neighborhood there. Basically, Iowa State, Nebraska, Kansas State, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Northwestern. Then either maybe take the Oklahoma State matches and then put the Oklahoma State schools out and put the Indiana schools in, or whatever, however you want to do that. That's roughly how I would have it. I think that you'd have so many good regional rivalries there. You'd have good states next to each other. You'd have good interstates rivalry. Like the 4-way rivalry, or even they call it the 5-way rivalry pool between Iowa State, Nebraska, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa would be phenomenal. That would be the best. That'd be the best. Brian, oh boy, they hate matches with us in Minnesota. Yeah. They murdered Jack Trice. They absolutely did. That's why Iowa State and Minnesota do not get along. That's why we don't play them. We do not play them unless, among many reasons, but we don't play Minnesota for reasons, for lots of good reasons. So TMFB right here is exactly right on. Each conference would have all of its own flavor and culture. It'd be exciting and exciting, keeping rivalries and all that. Absolutely. We don't have to have all these super geographic conferences all over the place. I mean, no disrespect whatsoever to our Rye brothers out there in Morgantown, West Virginia. It's been great having you in the conference. However, you guys belong in the ACC. You guys know it. We know it. Like culturally, you fit fine in the Big 12. Just could be in the kind of the blue collar fan base, and it's fun. Like culturally, you fit in the Big 12 pretty well. But you guys would rather be playing Pittsburgh and Virginia Tech and Virginia and Marshall and whoever else. You would rather be playing those teams, and that's fine. It's perfectly fine to want your interstate and your regional rivalries. So, you guys would be playing Syracuse, your old Big East schools. They would love to be playing those. I don't blame them. UCF, I'm sure, would love to be in a conference with some of the other people around them, because right now they're not next to anybody. I'm sure they would love to be in a conference with some of the other Florida schools and the Carolina schools and stuff like that, so they didn't have to travel. They didn't have to travel crazy far for all of their games. Because what's UCF's closest home game? Is it Cincinnati? Maybe. I mean, West Virginia might be their closest home game, and it's not close. So it's like, God forbid they have to go play at BYU or something like that. Oof, it's awful. BYU in Utah could easily be Pac-12 schools. Easily. We could make the college football that everybody wants if Greg Sankey didn't exist. if the SEC and the Big Ten were not so dead set on their ego trips, we could have the college football that everybody wants. Who knows? Maybe Congress will force it someday, and that'll be the first time anybody's ever cheered for Congress. Who knows? It's an interesting thing, though, and it's going to take years and years and years to sort itself out. We'll see. Either way, appreciate everybody for joining. I think we're gonna end it for today. Really appreciate everybody tuning in, putting their comments in there. I very much appreciate all that. Really appreciate all the engagement. This is intended to be a discussion, not just me monologuing for an hour, but really just a discussion with everybody involved. So, I appreciate everybody that's able to tune in live. Really appreciate everybody that, even if you can't tune in live, still viewing this video afterwards in this channel's feed. Really appreciate that as well. If you guys would really appreciate, if you subscribe to the channel, like the videos and all that, that helps. Like I said, it makes me deeply uncomfortable to beg for the engagement like that, but that's just kind of what the YouTube algorithm wants. It wants likes and it wants subscriptions and all that. So if you guys would be so kind as to do that, would really appreciate that. But we will see you guys all again next week. I know I said this week that we were talking about doing the Iowa State all-time team for College Football 26. Unfortunately, the College Football 26 team builder site is still pretty wonky, so I'm not going to put anything together for that just yet until that gets updated or fixed or something. But eventually we will get to the all-time team. But we are just 1 month away. In exactly 1 month, I will be on my way to Chicago to get ready to hop on a plane for Dublin, Ireland. We are 1 month away from college football, folks. We are closing in. The light is that we can see the light at the end of the tunnel finally. So, everybody, thank you for tuning in. We will see you all again next week here on the Voice of College Football Network. Iowa State Cyclones Live. I'm Levi Stevenson. Have a great rest of your week. Go Cyclones. Beat Iowa.